26 years I served in Parliament, witnessing the rise and fall of ministries, the ebb and flow of public opinion, and the dangerous allure of those who promise to remake society according to abstract principles. Today, as I observe the American political landscape, I see familiar patterns, the same intoxicating rhetoric of radical transformation, the same contempt for inherited wisdom, the same fatal belief that human society can be reconstructed like a machine. But history has taught us, through blood and tears, that the reformer's scalpel preserves what the revolutionary's axe destroys. The French revolutionaries promised liberty, equality, and fraternity. They delivered terror, chaos, and despotism. The American founders, by contrast, sought to preserve their ancient liberties while adapting their institutions, and built a republic that endures. The difference lies not in their goals, but in their methods. One respected the accumulated wisdom of generations, the other treated it as mere prejudice. One built upon existing foundations, the other swept them away. Today, when voices cry for sweeping change, when politicians promise to transform America overnight, when abstract theories triumph over practical experience, we must ask ourselves, will we choose the patient work of reform, or will we surrender to the seductive but destructive promise of revolution? Chapter 1, The Parliament Taught Me, Why Institutions Must Evolve, Not Break. My decades in Parliament revealed a profound truth that eludes those who never wrestled with the complexities of governing. Successful reform requires not the destruction of existing institutions, but their careful cultivation. I watched ministries rise and fall, policies succeed and fail, and through it all, I learned that the British Constitution's greatness lay not in any single document or principle, but in its capacity for organic growth. Consider how our parliamentary system evolved. We did not wake one morning and decide to limit the monarch's power through revolutionary decree. Instead, over centuries, through countless small adjustments, each responding to specific circumstances, each building upon previous experience, we developed a system where royal authority balanced with parliamentary responsibility. The Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, the Bill of Rights, these were not abstract philosophical statements, but practical responses to immediate problems, each preserving what worked while correcting what failed. This organic development stands in stark contrast to the French revolutionary approach, which I witnessed with growing horror. The revolutionaries, intoxicated by abstract principles, swept away centuries of institutional development in favor of untested theories. They abolished provinces that had grown naturally around local customs and needs, replacing them with artificial departments designed on geometric principles. They destroyed guilds that had provided social stability and economic training, leaving artisans adrift. They obliterated the church that had offered moral guidance and charitable assistance, creating a spiritual vacuum that ideology rushed to fill. The result was predictable to anyone who understood that societies are not machines to be dismantled and rebuilt, but living organisms that must be tended with care. The terror followed inevitably from the attempt to remake human nature itself. When you destroy the customs, traditions, and institutions that channel human passions into constructive purposes, those passions do not disappear, they explode with volcanic force. America offers a different lesson. The founders understood that their task was not to create something entirely new, but to preserve and adapt their inherited liberties. They built upon English constitutional principles while adapting them to American circumstances. They preserved the common law, maintained established property rights, and respected religious traditions while creating new institutions suited to their federal republic. This prudent approach to change explains why the American Revolution preserved liberty while the French Revolution devoured it. The lesson for contemporary America is clear: lasting reform must respect existing institutions while carefully improving them. Healthcare, education, immigration, these challenges require not revolutionary transformation, but the patient work of building upon what functions while carefully correcting what fails. This demands the humility to recognize that our current institutions, however imperfect, embody the accumulated wisdom of generations of experience. Chapter 2: How the French Revolution Revealed the Fatal Flaw of Abstract Politics. The French Revolution stands as history's most instructive example of why abstract reasoning, divorced from historical experience, leads inevitably to tyranny. I watched with growing alarm as intelligent men, armed with what they believed were universal principles, systematically destroyed a civilization that had developed over centuries. Their error was not in their desire for improvement, but in their method. They trusted abstract theory over concrete experience. The revolutionaries began with seemingly reasonable propositions, that all men are created equal, that government should serve the general will, that society should be organized according to rational principles. These abstractions seemed so obviously true that they felt justified in sweeping away any institution that appeared to contradict them. Ancient provinces were abolished because they reflected historical accident rather than rational design. The Church was attacked because its teachings conflicted with Enlightenment philosophy. Traditional ranks and distinctions were eliminated because they offended theoretical equality. But societies are not mathematical problems to be solved through logical deduction. They are complex organisms that have evolved through countless interactions between human nature, historical circumstances, and practical necessities. The very institutions that appeared irrational to revolutionary theorists often served essential functions that only became apparent after their destruction. Take the example of intermediate institutions, the guilds, provincial assemblies, and traditional corporations that the revolutionaries swept away. These appeared to revolutionary minds as obstacles to rational administration and barriers to individual freedom. But they actually served as buffers between the individual and the state, providing identity, community, and protection against arbitrary power. Their destruction left individuals atomized and vulnerable, creating the very conditions that made despotism possible. The revolutionaries' faith in abstract reasoning also led them to believe they could remake human nature itself. They assumed that once old institutions were destroyed and new ones created according to rational principles, citizens would naturally behave as their theories predicted. When reality stubbornly refused to conform to their expectations, they concluded that the people themselves needed to be transformed through force. This is how the pursuit of abstract liberty led to concrete tyranny. The contrast with English constitutional development could not be starker. Our liberties grew not from abstract principles imposed from above, but from concrete struggles over specific grievances. The right to trial by jury emerged from particular cases of injustice. Parliamentary control over taxation developed through specific conflicts between Crown and Commons. Religious toleration evolved through painful experience of sectarian conflict. Each liberty was rooted in historical experience and adapted to practical circumstances. This experiential approach to political development explains why English liberties proved more durable than French revolutionary rights. Our Constitution was not a house of cards that collapsed when abstract principles conflicted with practical realities. It was a living tree that bent with changing circumstances while maintaining its essential structure. Modern America faces the same choice between experiential wisdom and abstract ideology. Progressive reformers often approach complex problems with the same revolutionary confidence that characterized 1789 France. They proposed to transform healthcare, education, or the economy according to theoretical models, dismissing practical objections as mere obstacles to progress. But prudent reform requires not the implementation of abstract theories, but careful attention to how proposed changes will interact with existing institutions and human nature as it actually exists. Chapter 3: True Representation: Why Good Leaders Sometimes Must Ignore Popular Opinion. My experience representing Bristol taught me one of the most difficult truths in democratic governance: true representation sometimes requires a representative to act against the immediate wishes of his constituents. This paradox, which I explained to the electors of Bristol in 1774, remains as relevant today as it was then, especially in an age when politicians mistake opinion polling for political wisdom. When I told the Bristol electors that I owed them my judgment, not merely my obedience, I was articulating a principle essential to free government. A representative is not a delegate bound to transmit the will of his constituents like a passive telegraph, but a trustee entrusted to exercise his best judgment for their ultimate benefit. This distinction may seem academic, but it determines whether a nation will be governed by wisdom or by passion, by long-term interest or by immediate desire. Consider the American colonial crisis that dominated my parliamentary career. Popular opinion in Britain often favored harsh measures against the colonists. Taxation without representation seemed reasonable to those who viewed America merely as a source of revenue. Had I simply reflected popular sentiment, I would have supported policies that ultimately cost Britain her American empire. Instead, I argued for conciliation and understanding, recognizing that true British interest lay in preserving the connection through mutual respect rather than destroying it through coercion. This principle of independent judgment becomes especially crucial during times of popular excitement, when passion overwhelms reason and immediate gratification clouds long-term consequences. The representative who merely follows the popular will during such moments abdicates his essential responsibility. He becomes not a leader but a follower, not a statesman but a demagogue. Yet this independence must be exercised with genuine humility and deep accountability. The representative who ignores his constituents' views must do so not from arrogance or personal interest, but from a sincere conviction that their long-term welfare requires temporary opposition to their immediate desires. He must be prepared to explain his reasoning, to accept the consequences of his judgment, and ultimately to submit his conduct to electoral review. The tension between popular will and representative judgment reflects a deeper truth about human nature. Individuals acting collectively often display wisdom that exceeds any single member, but they also exhibit passions and prejudices that can lead to destructive decisions. The art of representation lies in harnessing collective wisdom while tempering collective folly. This principle applies with special force to contemporary American challenges. Consider fiscal policy. Voters consistently demand both lower taxes and increased spending, an impossible combination that representatives must somehow reconcile through the exercise of practical judgment. Or immigration policy, where popular sentiment often conflicts with economic necessity and humanitarian obligation. The representative who simply reflects immediate popular opinion on such issues fails in his essential duty. The alternative to principled representation is not democracy but demagoguery, ruled by those who flatter popular prejudices rather than serve genuine popular interests. The demagogue tells people what they want to hear, the statesman tells them what they need to hear. The demagogue promises easy solutions to complex problems, the statesman acknowledges difficulty while working toward achievable improvements. This understanding of representation also illuminates why constitutional government requires more than majority rule. A constitution properly understood creates a framework within which representative judgment can operate, protecting both minority rights and long-term interests against momentary popular passion. It ensures that government serves not just the temporary will of the majority, but the enduring interests of the whole community. The challenge for contemporary America lies in cultivating both representatives capable of exercising principled judgment and citizens capable of distinguishing between genuine leadership and mere pandering. Chapter 4: The Economics of Prudence: Why Conservative Reform Protects Both Prosperity and Justice. My approach to political economy was shaped by the same principle that guided my constitutional thinking: respect for organic development over abstract theory. During my parliamentary career, I witnessed how economic policies born from theoretical elegance often produced practical disasters, while those grounded in historical experience and gradual adjustment created lasting prosperity and genuine justice. The American colonial crisis provided the perfect illustration of this principle. British politicians, enchanted by neat theories of imperial taxation, imposed levies that made perfect sense on paper but ignored the complex realities of colonial development. The Sugar Act, Stamp Act, and Tea Act all reflected sound fiscal theory. The colonies benefited from British protection and should contribute to its cost. Yet these measures failed catastrophically because they disrupted economic relationships that had evolved organically over generations. I argued instead for a policy that acknowledged these organic developments while achieving legitimate British objectives. Rather than imposing abstract principles of taxation, we should have worked within existing commercial relationships, allowing colonial prosperity to benefit British trade naturally. This approach would have preserved the empire while respecting the economic traditions that made both Britain and America prosperous. This experience taught me that successful economic policy must balance multiple considerations: efficiency and tradition, innovation and stability, individual enterprise and social responsibility. The purely theoretical economist sees only abstract relationships between supply and demand, profit and loss. The prudent statesman recognizes that economic relationships are embedded in social institutions that serve purposes beyond mere efficiency. Consider the question of property rights, which lies at the heart of any economic system. Abstract libertarian theory treats property as an absolute individual right, to be used without reference to social consequences. Revolutionary theory treats property as theft, to be redistributed according to theoretical equality. Both approaches ignore the complex reality that property serves essential social functions beyond individual satisfaction. Property, properly understood, is a social trust as much as an individual right. The landowner owes obligations to his tenants, his community, and future generations. The merchant bears responsibility for the welfare of his workers and the quality of his products. The manufacturer must consider not only profit but also the environmental and social consequences of his operations. These obligations are not external constraints imposed by government, but internal responsibilities inherent in the proper exercise of property rights. This understanding leads to a conservative approach to economic reform that protects both prosperity and justice. When market failures occur, and they inevitably do in any complex economy, the solution lies not in revolutionary transformation but in careful adjustment that preserves beneficial aspects while correcting harmful ones. Regulation should build upon existing commercial practices rather than replacing them with theoretical models. The financial crisis that periodically disrupts modern economies illustrates this principle perfectly. Such crises typically result from the abandonment of traditional commercial prudence in favor of innovative but untested practices. The solution lies not in more abstract regulation but in returning to time-tested principles of sound banking and prudent investment, updated to address contemporary circumstances. Similarly, the challenge of economic inequality requires not revolutionary redistribution but prudent policies that expand opportunity while maintaining incentives for productive activity. This might include educational reforms that build upon successful traditional approaches, infrastructure investments that enhance rather than replace private economic activity, and social policies that strengthen rather than replace traditional institutions of community support. The art of conservative economic policy lies in distinguishing between beneficial change and destructive transformation. Markets themselves are conservative institutions that preserve what works while discarding what fails, but they operate within social and legal frameworks that must be carefully maintained. The invisible hand requires visible institutions to function properly. Contemporary America faces economic challenges that require this kind of prudent approach: technological disruption that threatens traditional employment, global competition that challenges established industries, demographic changes that strain social insurance systems. These problems cannot be solved through ideological approaches that either worship or demonize market forces, but only through careful policies that harness market efficiency while preserving social stability. Chapter 5: Religion, Morality, and the Social Order: Why Faith Matters for Freedom. Throughout my parliamentary career, I maintained that religion constitutes the foundation of civil society, not merely a private matter of individual conscience. This conviction, unfashionable among the philosophical circles of my time and perhaps even more so today, emerged from practical observation of how societies actually function rather than from abstract reasoning about how they ought to function. The French Revolution provided the most dramatic illustration of what happens when a society attempts to uproot its religious foundations. The revolutionaries, convinced that religion represented mere superstition and obstacle to rational progress, launched a systematic campaign to de-Christianize France. They closed churches, murdered priests, and attempted to replace Christian worship with the cult of reason and later the cult of the Supreme Being. The results were catastrophic not merely for religion, but for the entire social fabric. When you destroy the institutions that teach moral restraint, provide charitable assistance, and offer meaning beyond material satisfaction, you do not create a more rational society, you create a moral vacuum that ideology and violence rush to fill. The terror was not an accidental byproduct of revolutionary politics but an inevitable consequence of destroying the moral foundations that make civilized life possible. This lesson applies with particular force to the relationship between religion and political freedom. Many assume that freedom requires the separation of religion from public life, but experience teaches the opposite lesson. Free government depends upon citizens capable of self-restraint, and self-restraint depends upon moral convictions that transcend immediate self-interest. Religion provides these convictions in a way that abstract philosophy cannot. Consider the American example, which I defended against British misrule precisely because I recognized that American liberty was grounded in religious conviction. The New England towns that resisted British tyranny were the same communities that gathered around Puritan churches. Their resistance was not mere rebellion but conscientious objection rooted in religious principles about legitimate authority and moral obligation. This religious foundation of American liberty explains why the American Revolution preserved freedom while the French Revolution destroyed it. American revolutionaries saw themselves as defending religious as well as political liberties against corrupt authority. French revolutionaries saw religion itself as the enemy of liberty. The Americans built new institutions upon existing moral foundations. The French attempted to build new institutions after destroying their moral foundations. The practical benefits of established religion extend beyond political stability to encompass the entire range of social relationships. Religious institutions provide education, charity, and community organization that government cannot effectively replace. They create bonds of mutual obligation that transcend narrow self-interest. They preserve moral traditions that prevent each generation from having to rediscover basic ethical principles through painful experience. Yet the establishment of religion must be understood properly, as maintaining public support for religious institutions and moral principles without imposing particular doctrines through coercion. The goal is not theological uniformity but moral coherence, a shared foundation of ethical conviction that makes civilized discourse and cooperative action possible. This principle becomes especially important in addressing contemporary American challenges. The decline of religious observance has coincided with increased political polarization, social atomization, and moral confusion. This is not coincidental but causal. When people lose shared moral convictions rooted in religious tradition, they become more susceptible to ideological extremism and less capable of constructive compromise. The solution is not the imposition of particular religious doctrines but the restoration of public respect for religious institutions and moral traditions. This requires recognizing that religion serves essential public functions that secular institutions cannot adequately fulfill. Educational policies should support rather than undermine religious schools. Social policies should strengthen rather than replace religious charities. Cultural policies should respect rather than mock religious convictions. This approach to religion and public life reflects the broader conservative principle that successful reform builds upon existing institutions rather than replacing them with abstract alternatives. Religious traditions embody centuries of accumulated wisdom about human nature and social organization. A prudent statesman will seek to preserve and adapt this wisdom rather than discarding it in favor of untested theories. Chapter 6: Empire, Federation, and the Art of Governing Diverse Peoples. My understanding of imperial governance was forged in the crucible of the American crisis, where I learned that successful government of diverse peoples requires not uniformity imposed from above, but unity achieved through respect for local variation. This principle, which I developed through painful observation of Britain's failed attempts to centralize colonial administration, offers crucial insights for contemporary challenges of federal governance and cultural diversity. The tragedy of British imperial policy in America was not that it sought too little control, but that it sought the wrong kind of control. British politicians, influenced by abstract theories of sovereignty, insisted that Parliament's authority must be uniform throughout the empire. They could not comprehend how royal authority could be supreme in Britain yet limited in America, how British subjects could enjoy different rights in different territories while remaining equally British. This theoretical rigidity blinded them to the practical reality that had made the empire prosperous and strong. American colonists had developed their own institutions over generations, their assemblies, their judicial procedures, their commercial practices, all grounded in British principles but adapted to American circumstances. These local variations were not defects to be corrected but strengths to be preserved. I argued instead for what we might now call a federal approach to imperial governance, unity in essentials, diversity in particulars. The Crown should maintain ultimate authority over foreign relations, trade regulation, and defense. But colonial assemblies should retain control over internal taxation, local administration, and social policy. This division of authority would have preserved imperial unity while respecting colonial autonomy. The principle behind this approach transcends the particular circumstances of 18th-century imperial governance. Large political societies inevitably encompass diverse communities with different traditions, needs, and circumstances. The art of governing such societies lies not in forcing uniformity upon this diversity, but in creating frameworks within which diversity can flourish while serving common purposes. Consider how this principle applies to contemporary American federalism. The Constitution originally embodied this insight, reserving most governmental functions to the states while granting specific enumerated powers to the federal government. This arrangement allowed different states to develop different approaches to common challenges while maintaining national unity on essential matters. The gradual centralization of American government over the past century represents a departure from this federal principle toward the same abstract uniformity that destroyed the British Empire. Federal politicians, like their British predecessors, assume that rational administration requires uniform policies imposed from the center. They cannot comprehend how American authority can be supreme nationally yet limited locally, how American citizens can enjoy different policies in different states while remaining equally American. But diversity of governance is not a defect to be corrected but a strength to be preserved. Different states serve as laboratories of democracy, experimenting with different approaches to common problems. What works in Massachusetts may not work in Mississippi. What succeeds in California may fail in Kansas. This variation allows the gradual discovery of best practices while avoiding the catastrophic failure that results when uniform policies prove misguided. The challenge of governing diverse peoples also applies to cultural and ethnic diversity within American society. The same principle that argues for governmental federalism suggests approaches to cultural diversity that avoid both forced assimilation and destructive fragmentation. Different communities can maintain their particular traditions while sharing common civic principles and national identity. This approach requires what I called virtual representation, the idea that governors can serve the interests of people unlike themselves through empathetic understanding and principled judgment. American representatives need not share the particular backgrounds of all their constituents, but they must understand and respect the legitimate diversity of American experience. The alternative to this federal approach to diversity is the kind of abstract uniformity that characterized both British imperial policy and French revolutionary administration. When central authority attempts to impose uniform solutions upon diverse circumstances, it inevitably produces either rebellion or oppression. People will not long submit to governance that ignores their particular needs and traditions. The art of federal governance thus requires the same prudential judgment that characterizes all successful statecraft, the wisdom to distinguish between essential unity and beneficial diversity, the skill to maintain common purposes while respecting local autonomy, the restraint to govern through persuasion rather than coercion wherever possible. Contemporary America needs leaders who understand these principles of federal governance, who can maintain national unity while respecting state and local diversity, who can preserve common civic culture while accommodating cultural variety. Chapter 7: Applying Burkean Wisdom to Contemporary American Challenges. After decades of observing political folly and occasional wisdom, I am convinced that the principles which guided my parliamentary career offer essential insights for contemporary American governance. The challenges facing your republic, though different in their particular circumstances, arise from the same fundamental tensions between order and liberty, tradition and progress, local autonomy and national unity that I witnessed in 18th century Britain. The first application of conservative prudence to American politics concerns the relationship between federal and state authority. Your Constitution wisely distributed governmental functions between different levels, recognizing that some challenges require national coordination while others are better addressed by local communities. Yet the tendency toward centralization, driven by the same abstract reasoning that led to British imperial rigidity, threatens this careful balance. Consider healthcare policy, where federal mandates attempt to impose uniform solutions upon diverse circumstances and preferences. A prudent approach would recognize that medical needs, economic conditions, and cultural values vary significantly across your vast republic. Rather than forcing all states into identical systems, federal policy should establish basic standards while allowing states to develop approaches suited to their particular circumstances. This federalist method would preserve the benefits of both national coordination and local adaptation. The challenge of immigration demonstrates similar principles. Abstract theories, whether they demand completely open borders or completely closed ones, ignore the complex realities of human migration and community formation. Prudent policy would recognize both America's generous tradition of welcoming newcomers and the legitimate concerns of communities that bear the immediate costs of rapid demographic change. Gradual integration based on respect for both immigrant aspirations and existing community standards serves justice better than ideological extremes. Education policy offers another arena where Burkean principles apply directly. The progressive impulse to revolutionize American schools according to abstract theories has produced decades of expensive failure. Meanwhile, approaches that build upon proven traditional methods, rigorous academic content, moral instruction, parental involvement, local control, continue to produce superior results where they are allowed to function. Educational reform should enhance rather than replace what works. The question of cultural change requires special application of conservative prudence. American society has always evolved through the gradual adaptation of existing institutions rather than their revolutionary replacement. The expansion of civil rights, for instance, succeeded when it appealed to existing American principles of equality and justice, demanding that these principles be applied consistently rather than abandoned for entirely new ones. Contemporary cultural movements that demand rapid transformation of fundamental social institutions, marriage, family, religious liberty, should be approached with the same caution that any prudent statesman applies to proposals for sweeping change. This does not mean reflexive opposition to all change, but careful attention to preserving what serves human flourishing while adapting what requires improvement. Economic policy demonstrates the need for what I called economical reform, changes that eliminate genuine abuses while preserving beneficial institutions. The challenge of technological disruption requires not the revolutionary transformation of American capitalism but its careful adaptation to new circumstances. This might include education and training programs that build upon traditional apprenticeship models, social insurance reforms that strengthen rather than replace family and community support systems, and regulatory approaches that harness rather than stifle innovative energy. The polarization that currently afflicts American politics reflects the abandonment of prudential judgment in favor of ideological purity. Both progressive and populist movements exhibit the same dangerous confidence in abstract principles that characterized the French revolutionaries. They demand immediate transformation rather than gradual improvement, absolute victory rather than prudent compromise. The restoration of American political health requires leaders capable of what I called noble prejudice, deep attachment to American constitutional principles combined with practical wisdom about their application. Such leaders would defend American institutions while working to perfect them, preserve American traditions while adapting them to contemporary challenges, maintain American unity while respecting American diversity. This approach to political leadership requires both intellectual humility and moral courage, humility to recognize the limits of human knowledge and the wisdom embedded in existing institutions, courage to resist popular pressures when they conflict with long-term public interest. It requires representatives who understand their role as trustees rather than delegates, statesmen rather than mere politicians. The ultimate test of Burkean conservatism in contemporary America will be its ability to preserve what generations of Americans have built while adapting it to serve rising generations. Conclusion. As I reflect upon the lessons that decades of parliamentary experience have taught, I am struck by how consistently human nature reveals itself across centuries and continents. The same passions that drove French revolutionaries to destroy their civilization drive contemporary movements that promise to transform America overnight. The same abstract reasoning that lost Britain her American empire tempts modern politicians to impose uniform solutions upon diverse circumstances. The same impatience with gradual improvement that led to the terror manifests itself in demands for immediate and total transformation of American institutions. Yet I remain hopeful, for America possesses what revolutionary France lacked: constitutional traditions that channel political energy into constructive purposes, federal institutions that balance unity with diversity, and civic culture that values both liberty and order. Your founders understood the wisdom of building upon inherited strengths while adapting to new circumstances. They created not a perfect system, but a perfectible one, capable of organic growth rather than requiring revolutionary replacement. The choice before contemporary America is the same that has faced every generation. Will you choose the patient work of prudent reform, or will you surrender to the seductive promise of revolutionary transformation? Will you preserve and improve what generations have built, or will you trust abstract theories over accumulated experience? The path of prudence is longer and more difficult than the path of ideology, but it leads to lasting improvement rather than destructive change. Choose wisely, for upon your choice depends not only American prosperity, but the cause of constitutional government throughout the world. Remember always that true political wisdom lies not in the perfection of human institutions, but in their careful cultivation by citizens who understand both their promise and their limitations.